Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today's webinar is Collaborative Conversations, Parental Engagement in the Indian Child Welfare Act, a spotlight on the St. Louis County, Duluth, Minnesota Indian Child Welfare Court. My name is Lynelle Hartway. I'm a program manager at the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges in the Family Violence and Domestic Relations Department. Wanted to start out today's presentation by providing a special thanks to the St. Louis County Duluth ICWA Court, the Tribal State Partnership Team, and the St. Louis County Duluth ICWA Collaborative, which includes the presenters on our panel today and many others who have done the work behind our discussion today. Our learning objectives for our webinar and discussion are understand the role of collaboration and engaging with parents in ICWA matters, discuss the ways in which collaborative efforts have helped improve outcomes for Indian families, and identify ways to incorporate collaborative best practices into ICWA practice. Today's webinar on collaborative conversations is part of a series we are developing in conjunction with the ICWA Court and the TSPT and the Collaborative, as well as UMD. We are focusing on different aspects of ICWA and focusing in on how to incorporate collaboration into implementation of ICWA. The goal of the series is to spotlight key aspects of the efforts of the St. Louis Duluth ICWA Court's implementation of ICWA and MIFA, with a focus on how those efforts involved collaboration between and among the agencies, systems, and tribes. The format for our discussion and for this webinar and the rest of the series includes an expert panel from the St. Louis Duluth ICWA Court, the Tribal State Partnership Team, and the ICWA Collaborative. We have Mark Erickson from the University of Minnesota Duluth and our online participants. As Stephanie mentioned, we encourage participation from those who have joined us, and you should feel free to join in the conversation as we go along using the chat function and provide any comments or questions that you have as we go. I will be working with my colleagues here at NCJFCJ to monitor the chat, and we'll do our best to relay those questions to the panel as we go along. So I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and provide a little bit of information about their role with the ICWA Court. Judge Tarnowski.
Greetings. Hi, I'm Sally Tarnowski. I'm a judge in Duluth, Minnesota. I've been a judge for a little over 14 years, and we started the ICWA Court beginning with some collaborative meetings back in 2014, and our first court session started in April of 2015, and it's been an amazing and enlightening way of changing the way we've handled our CHIPS cases, and in particular our ICWA cases. So I'm looking forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you, Judge Tarnowski. Erika?
Hello, my name is Erika Randall, and I am a manager with the Minnesota Guardian Ad Litem program. And I myself am new to the ICWA Court team in Duluth. However, the Minnesota Guardian Ad Litem program is involved in ICWA courts throughout the state. And so I'm feeling it kind of took over or jumped in upon the retirement of Sue Love, who was very involved in the Duluth ICWA Court. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Erika. Terri?
Hello, everyone. My name is Terri Portwright. I am a private attorney in northern Minnesota. I am one of 3 attorneys that is court appointed to represent parents in child protection cases. I have been working as a child protection parent attorney since about 2006 and have been involved with the ICWA CHIPS Court in Duluth essentially since the inception in 2014, 2015. I also represent parents in non-ICWA CHIPS court, so I do have the perspective of seeing how things are done in each type of court. Thank you.
Thank you, Terri. Donna?
Bonjour. I'm Donna Newgren-Issacson. You'll have to excuse my voice. I'm kind of losing it. I am an Indian child welfare social worker with White Earth Reservation. I'm also the Duluth representative for the State ICWA Advisory Council. And I've been involved and been going to the meetings since they started in Duluth, and kind of been there when the spark started. So nice to meet everybody.
Thank you, Donna. And Nisha?
My name is Nisha Dupuy. I am a case manager in the ICWA unit here in South St. Louis County. I've worked in child protection, I think, for about 8 years. Prior to working for the county, I was a tribal social worker for many years. So I also have the luxury of knowing it, I guess, from both sides, as both a tribal worker and then now as a county social worker in the ICWA unit.
Thank you, Nisha. And welcome, everyone. Also joining us today is Mark Erickson from the University of Minnesota Duluth. And Mark is going to introduce himself and then give us a little bit of information about his work with the court.
Yeah, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. My name is Mark Erickson. I work for the Center for Regional and Tribal Child Welfare Studies in the social work department at the University of Minnesota Duluth. There I'm a researcher, but then I also work on this collaborative project that we're talking about today. It's actually a 3-site HHS ICWA implementation partnership project. And in Duluth, we chose to, well, it was given the name Gian Anishinaabe B'Madizawag, which, you know, the purpose is so that the children can live a good way of life. And that's what we seek to do in the work we do here. And you can see the information about the ICWA court, and Judge Tarnowski gave the historical overview. So I kind of I'm coming at it from a social work perspective, a social worker lens. And I wanted to start off by talking about our center, our agency's 5 core values. One of them being collaboration and bridging across systems, which is our focus today. And that really is that we believe that a learning child welfare system can be created through strong, inclusive alliances of trust that respect multiple perspectives and voices. And I hope you'll hear some of that today. Some of our other values that we have as our core values as an agency is a relational worldview. And that is really just recognizing that our connection to others is more than just a professional relationship. You know, we see the people we work with as relatives, the families we work with as relatives. Equity, inclusion, just embracing culturally ways of knowing and understand we have a lot to learn from one another. Tribal sovereignty is our 4th value. And we believe that tribes are best positioned to identify what is in the best interest of children from their nations. And then finally, education and training. We're really involved in training throughout the state of Minnesota with the child welfare workforce, with the full support of all 11 tribal nations in Minnesota through the ICWA Advisory Council, where Donna mentioned she sits on that council representing the urban area here in Duluth. And in our education and training, we're committed to developing education and training that assumes the best of people, you know, fosters self-awareness and growth, and highlights the strengths of tribal communities. So why am I talking about our values? That's a weird way to start off today. Well, I'm really doing it because I believe we do a pretty good job at living out our values in our work through the center, and our approach to our relationship with the Minnesota 6th Judicial District in Duluth. And Judge Tarnowski talked about you know, how the court got off the ground, started in 2014 and then officially in 2015 started hearings, but the relationship goes back almost 10 years to 2012 when we participated in an ICWA court monitoring project in Duluth. And I've been with the center since 2017, and I've consistently heard reinforced messaging from all the people above me in the center about how maintaining a healthy relationship with the court and with the child welfare system is just crucial for improving outcomes for American Indian families. And while I won't go through the entire history of the Duluth ICWA court, I can distill it, to say that it really, and I think the judge will agree with this, it really grew out of a relationship between Judge Tarnowski and our current center director, Bree Bussey. And so we work a lot in relationships. So much like Judge Tarnowski adapted the physical space of the Duluth ICWA court to put all parties on the same level around the same table, our collaborative relationships around the ICWA court are as strong as they are because all professional parties are at the same level around the same table. And this manifests through a few different meeting groups, such as our Duluth ICWA Collaborative, which Lynelle mentioned, our HHS Project Specific Tribal State Partnership Team, and a smaller group that we call the Denver Five. You don't have to ask why, but since we're in Duluth. But that smaller team consists of the judge, a tribal agency attorney, the assistant county attorney, social work supervisor, a tribal agency supervisor, and again, Bree Bussey, our center director. So really through these collaborative bodies, relationships have been cultivated over time. And now anyone on these teams is a call or a text message away from any other member. So the practical, I cannot list everything that has been implemented through collaborative conversations, but I'll give one brief recent example that I brought up yesterday when we were meeting, and that is how we write petitions. And this is directly related to today's topic of parental engagement, because people in our tribal state partnership team raise concerns about our petition writing in the 6th district, and we call them CHIPS in here, so child in need of protection or services. And the petitions in St. Louis County and Duluth were uniquely long and extensive, and then rather than drawing out the imminent safety concern and the work the county has done with the family after it was clear that this remained a persistent sticking point, really encumbering the experience of families, the tribes, the judge, and others, we set out to experiment with revising how the county writes petitions. So instead of starting with all the historic information about every issue the family has experienced, we flipped chronologically to focus on the imminent concern first, so the family was not re-traumatized by past history as they looked at this long document. We also moved information about tribal affiliation and notification, and that's to the point here that parental engagement does involve tribal engagement as well, and consulting with the tribe. So we moved things around to make things more visible for the tribe so that they could see information about tribal affiliation, notification, and it gave them a better idea right away about which other tribes might be involved. And then we also included statements about what the county has done in regard to active efforts and other elements of our Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act, which is our ICWA law here. So while this was admittedly a really big task for the county attorney's office, the collaborative relationships held and we were able to work through it, and we're still in a testing phase, but it really serves as a great example for me, at least, of something that we may not have been able to do earlier into the collaborative relationship, but we're at a point now in our relationship where we can. So as we kick off the webinar talking about parental engagement, which I know our panel will have great things to share with you, I hope you get a good sense of how this group from Duluth, Minnesota works in collaboration and really in relationship to implement the letter of the law as well as the spirit behind the Indian Child Welfare Act. And with that, I'll give it back over to you, Lynelle.
Thank you, Mark. So just to provide a little backdrop to our discussion, as I'm sure most everyone here knows, the Indian Child Welfare Act was enacted by Congress after years of hearings on the topic of the disproportionate number of Indian children in state welfare systems and its impact to children, families, and tribes. As a result of that, Congress enacted through ICWA minimum standards for states and their systems with the intent to reduce removals and terminations, promote stronger efforts at reunification, make greater efforts towards kinship placement and as an effort to reduce and minimize trauma. Our collaborative conversations series and discussion today is an effort to spotlight the efforts of the court that is working together to move beyond the minimum compliance standards set under ICWA and look at the spirit and intent of ICWA's requirements to implement practices, including collaborative practices to ensure better outcomes for children and families. And although ICWA does not contain a separate set of requirements per se for just on parental engagement, it instead has elements throughout it, which in order to be achieved in their own sections require parental engagement. And so it is woven through the provisions on proper inquiry, notice, implementation of active efforts, and placement preferences, all of which require effective communication with and engagement of parents, as well as tribal communities to be carried out effectively. And that brings us to our first question for our panel today. What are some ways where issues around parental engagement can be identified, prevented, or resolved? Judge Tarnowski, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. Couldn't find my mouse. You know, we have really worked hard in our court to have relationships around the table. And the table that I reference is behind me in the courtroom, but also the table where our collaborative meets. And our collaborative consists of representatives from all of our stakeholders, all of our tribes, all of our, you know, the county attorney's office, parent attorneys, social workers, tribal social workers, guardians ad litem. And, you know, right from the start, so beginning 6-7 years ago, we are not afraid to talk about issues. And so we developed that by engaging in these meetings and having respectful conversations. So now when we want to make sure that there is parental engagement, and if we have issues surrounding them, those can be brought up at the collaborative. We have a smaller, a little more nimble group that meets fairly regularly. We can talk about things there. And then separately, and I'm assuming that Terri will talk a bit about notice in particular and issues that she's seen with her clients and how she has gone about, you know, bringing that issue to the forefront. But in the courtroom, I can speak to the fact that I go around the table, I sit it down in the well. The table is the one that's behind me in the picture. And everybody's on the same eye level. Everybody's able to see each other's faces when we talk. So I start on my left and I honor the circle by going around the circle. So the county attorney is to my immediate left, and I hear from the county. I hear from the tribal representatives. I hear from the guardian. I hear from the parent attorney, and then I ask the parent at each and every hearing, you know, is there anything that you need? And their attorneys have told them that I'm probably going to ask them that, and they will tell me if there's something that is problematic. And so trying to engage them in a way that makes me credible with them, that establishes some rapport with them, and make sure that everybody around the table has that same rapport. Our goal is to get them engaged. Our goal is, and everybody has that same goal, everybody at the table. So we've worked really hard to make it a much less adversarial process and a much more problem-solving, supportive, encouraging environment for folks to come in and you know, be proud of the work that they've done, to be honest when they've had a slip or two, but to know that if they do have that slip or two, it's not going to be the end of everything. Rather, everybody's going to, you know, work with them to re-engage them and help them to be supportive in getting their kids back.
Thanks, Judge. Donna?
I don't know where to start even. I think, yes, the court has been great. I think we're all kind of feel like we're all on the same page. A lot of ways that I've with the county having, worked to engage parents, so we're all on the same page is by joint texting, calling, three-way calls, getting people involved in the phone conversations. So we all know what's going on in real time. Meetings, Zoom meetings with parents and families to kind of talk about any concerns or any needs that they may have, things we might not have identified that might prevent them from not making appointments. I find that there's so many efforts to get a person to an appointment at times, just the county workers going out to get them, the tribal workers. It's just been really a very supportive group. And, we don't always, there might be that one parent or something that we can't engage with, and it's maybe just not their time at this time. So I think though we put in a lot of efforts, a lot of joint communication efforts to keep parents involved.
Thank you, Donna. Nisha?
Thank you. Yeah, I can echo some of what Donna says. I think the collaboration amongst, social workers, we try to stay in contact all the time. I think, Donna and I work together now, and it is about like joint texting and with parents, taking turns going out to each other's homes. The platform that's been created in St. Louis County, I would like to say is unlike any other. So I think oftentimes when, as a county social worker, I can't engage or a parent doesn't want to talk with me, it is, reaching out to the tribal social workers. And oftentimes what I've found is tribal social workers tend to have more luck than I do as a county agency. One of the things that I've learned here throughout my experience being a county social worker is, there's that, I think, general mistrust from parents as an agency. And so for me, it's really identifying who I am as a person. While I may be an Indigenous person, the agency that I represent has that systemic oppression. And so while engaging with parents, it is, allowing for, not allowing, but like working collaboratively with tribal workers and also with parent attorneys. I think when I think about advocates, there's tribal workers, and then obviously their parent attorneys are a big part of that. So reaching out to them and really trying to have those conversations all together and all be on the same page. That way we can build that trust with parents.
Thanks, Nisha. Terri?
When I think about this question, I think about it in a different way. I think the group that we have make similar acknowledgments about the parents that we work with. The foundation of our work is based on knowing the horror of someone losing their children and having someone come in and say, you can't parent for whatever reason. Knowing what historical trauma does to a person and having that as part of our conversation about how we can interact with this person in a more productive and respectful fashion. Oftentimes, my clients, the parents, have had other experiences with the system, and very frequently they have been CHIPS kids themselves, and so they were removed from their parents' care. And so that's the foundation of the lack of trust in the system. I think our group, and one of the reasons our group is productive, is because we make all of those acknowledgments, and that's what we bring to the table on every single case. Parents know from all of us that this is supposed to be a collaborative process. And the purpose is to have their children returned to their care as soon as possible. They also know that in their attorney, whether it's me or one of the other attorneys, we are there to collaborate with the social workers, with the tribe, with the guardians, but they also know that in the event it turns adversarial, we are there to represent them. And we are oftentimes their voice in sorting issues out, whether it's in court or not. And I think we all know that most of the big issues are discussed at length prior to any court hearing. And we do our absolute best to resolve those issues without having to bring them to the court. And the issues that come to the court are issues that, for whatever reason, we could not resolve as a team. All of that said, that conveys to the parents that we're here to work as a team to help them get their children back. Oftentimes, that's what they need to see, that we trust one another. I trust Nisha, she trusts me, and so on. And we can work together to help in any way possible to get their children returned to their care. That's how we get them engaged, I think, in working their reunification plan. Thank you.
Great, Terri, thank you. Erika?
I don't have much else to add. Everybody covered it so well. I just want to touch on that. I think that this works well because we are, as I believe it was Terri said it, we are making acknowledgments up front about past trauma, about the reason for mistrust. And I think that helps. And I can say that I think that another thing that's helped a lot is that we are making sure that all of the people that are at the table participating in these very important cases are becoming educated in historical trauma. They're becoming educated in the Indian Child Welfare Act and MIFPA, and not just surfacely knowing that it's a law that they have to follow, that they have developed a true understanding and a true passion and dedication to applying ICWA and MIFPA. I think that's one of the things that I've seen that's really has made a difference for all the workers, guardians, social workers, tribal workers, because a lot of the workers that are on these cases, guardians, sometimes tribal workers, county workers themselves are not from the tribal community or tribal culture. And so they really have to work hard to develop an understanding and a passion so that they can get parental engagement and make connections with parents.
Thank you, Erika. So we are running a little bit on time, but any final thoughts? Anyone have anything else they wanted to add there? Any prior comments? Nope. Got a question for Terri or Judge Tarnowski. What do you attribute the more collaborative approach to child dependency practice as opposed to litigation? Are the attorneys trained to be collaborative in their representation? Is it the courtroom setup?
I can respond to that. I think one of the key issues from my perspective as a parent attorney is that a couple of us have been doing this work for over a decade, and we fully understand the collateral consequences of going to trial. And we are able to have a conversation with our clients about the pros and cons of approaching the case through an adversarial process versus a collaborative process. And so because we have that consistency in representation, I think it helps us interact with our clients. We also frequently have clients that we've represented multiple times. And so we have long-term relationships with them that allow things to be more collaborative. And for me, I'm from the area. I know a lot of the families that are involved in child protection court. And so it creates a different relationship than if I was, from a completely different community. And we also work with the county attorney in an attempt to resolve the case without needing to go to trial.
I'll just add a little bit to what Terri has had to say. I do think the fact that we have a lot of the same people doing this year after year who have worked with each other and can trust each other and know kind of where things stand is very critical. Since you asked, I do think the courtroom setup has a role in it as well. You know, in the past, before we went to the circle, we sat in a traditional courtroom. The county attorney and the social worker sat at one table. The parent attorney and the parents and their attorneys sat at another table. Guardian ad litem was in the back. The tribal workers were in the back. It felt adversarial. The setup in the courtroom now, you know, there isn't this division of one side or the other. It's a circle. So I do think that plays a role.
Lynelle, just one other thought on that issue too. I've done child protection work in other counties, and in other counties, it's very possible that the parent attorneys cannot talk directly to the social worker. And that just maximizes the adversarial nature of the process. In St. Louis County, parent attorneys can talk directly to the social worker, directly to the tribe, directly to the guardian, and not have to go through a county attorney. And so I think that really makes it more collaborative as well. There might be a simple question like, what time does parenting time start tomorrow? And if I have to go through the county attorney, because of just all of our busy schedules, I might not get an answer until after the visit starts, whereas I can text the social worker from the tribe or the county and they'll answer right away. So that access, from my perspective, to everybody on the team is really, really critical.
Thanks, everyone. Looks like we don't have any questions. Other questions from our audience? So please feel free to chime in. Even if we move on, we can always address the questions as we go. So going a little bit back to the requirements of ICWA, it was in its inception and creation, ICWA is as a step towards equity. It's an attempt to address both past harms and move forward in such a way to protect the best interests of Indian children and to promote the stability and security of Indian tribes. So some of the minimum requirements that ICWA establishes that pertain to parental engagement, as we stated before, certain sections on notice, inquiry, also the requirements for the return of the child to the home as soon as possible, and of course to avoid removal in the first place. And then of course the active efforts requirements that specifically require that they be conducted in partnership with the child's tribe, and the parents. So moving a little bit beyond the actual minimum requirement standards, and you're looking at the intent and the spirit of ICWA, looking at procedural and substantive requirements that are designed to have parental involvement, and creating the level and nature of the services that enable parents who are or may readily become fit parents retain or gain custody of their children. These particular requirements and implementation through collaborative efforts in a process is very important to ensuring parental engagement and centering that engagement as part of the process. And so we move to our second question. What are some ways that collaborative measures can be built into practice when it comes to parental engagement? Judge Tarnowski, you want to start us off?
Sure. My practice is always to inquire of the tribe at the hearing whether they agree that active efforts have occurred. I want the tribe's input on placement. Whether if the placement isn't ICWA compliant, does the tribe support a good cause finding? Does the tribe support the placement that is being, even if it isn't ICWA compliant? What does the tribe think? So I've made it very clear that I want everybody's input at the hearing. I think back to pre-ICWA court, and while my practice has always been to ask everybody if they have anything to add to the hearing. I know that is not the practice for all judges, and they don't call on everybody. I think that calling on everybody promotes the idea that the court does want to hear from everybody. And I do think that the circle really promotes a more willing, when you're talking to the back of people's heads, when you're sitting in the back of the courtroom, it's just a completely different feel. It doesn't feel like you're kind of an equal player, I don't think. So I think the courtroom setup has a lot to do with that. I think our meetings, our collaborative meetings, have really built a practice of, every collaborative meeting starts with a blessing by a tribal elder. We always have a meal together, so we get to know each other. I think before we started our court, if a county worker called a tribal worker or vice versa, I'm not sure they'd recognize each other's voices. I'm not sure that they ever saw each other. If they did, it wasn't often. Now, when they come into the courtroom and I ask a question of one or the other of them, they'll look at each other and say, "Did you want to answer her, or should I answer her, or did we do that together?" Or it's just this completely different feeling in terms of the practice of the social workers. I think that they have, they know each other now. They work frequently with each other. The county has, since we went to this court, the county has specialized quite a bit in the way that it does its work. So we have one county attorney who handles all of the cases instead of it being spread out among three. I have 1 or 2 designated days a month where we do the ICWA court. So that frees up her time on those other days instead of kind of being sprinkled across one hearing or one complete day a week. I think that in addition, there's an ICWA unit in the county that specializes in ICWA cases. That's all they do. They are familiar with the law, they're familiar with practices, they know the tribal workers as a result of all of that. So these relationships have developed in such a meaningful way that people really do, they want to work together, they do work together, and they work really well together. It's just a pleasure to see the work that they do.
Thanks, Judge. Erika?
I'm just gonna piggyback on something that Judge Tarnowski said. I think that it really is effective, not only one to sit in a circle and all be on the same level, but I also think it's really effective when you have the judge go around and specifically ask about specific items, such as, do you feel that active efforts have been made? Do you feel that, versus that question that I've seen a lot in court, that just is, does anybody have anything else? And then it's kind of silence at the end of the hearing, and it's at the very end. So I think it's really important to have the leader of the room, the judge, very educated, very knowledgeable in all of in ICWA and MIFPA, but also just really making sure that they are asking those pointed questions about active efforts and placement preferences, and about the safety, issue, so that it really forces people to give an answer and to really talk about those active efforts. Because I think a lot of times what I've seen over the years in non-ICWA courts is those questions about active efforts and whether they're are meeting the standard are not even being asked. And so then you're arguing about it 6, 9, 14 months later at a trial. And this really hopefully prevents that from happening because you're having those discussions at every review hearing. So I think that that's one of the biggest things that I've seen.
Wonderful. Thank you, Erika. Donna?
I think not only in St. Louis County, but statewide, with the different training, the Guardian Ad Litem program, ICWA part in their training that'll be coming up. In that, I think it's kind of been a statewide view of how to make things different. Our meetings with the state, our quarterly meetings, there's a lot of collaboration in the state of Minnesota and also, in St. Louis County. So, and it just keeps growing. I mean, it's spreading. The ICWA court, I mean, we have several now in the state, some that are new, very new. But it's something that as an advisory board member, we want to see throughout the state of Minnesota. So everybody has access in that equality.
Thank you, Donna. Nisha?
I think throughout this session, we've talked a lot about the relationships that have been built amongst this group in the court settings. I know as a county social worker, one of the things that my my previous supervisor worked pretty hard on, very hard on actually, was building those relationships with tribal partners. So as a county social worker right now, we meet once a month with, I think, most of the tribes across the state, or at least in northern Minnesota. So we're able to talk about the clients that we're serving, the people that we're working with, talk about our cases. And so, I think you've heard we have these meetings amongst the courts, but then there's also these meetings separately with tribal partners. Another piece that I think is important here in St. Louis County, we have safety grounded organized practice. So a lot of our engagement with parents, we try to meet with them collaboratively with tribal workers, guardian ad litems, and whoever their support system is. So family members, friends, to discuss our concerns, and then also to come up with next steps. So in regards to like parental engagement, we want everybody to come to the table, and you see that throughout the whole practice, from the court setting to what we do individually as line workers. And again, it's super important to have these conversations on every level of a case.
Thanks, Nisha. Terri?
I'm really glad Nisha brought that up, because if we look at things like safety planning meetings and family group decision-making meetings, those are two organizational practices that are used that bring everyone to the table to increase parental engagement. I just think it's so critical to remember that we would have parental engagement if parents trusted the system, and they're not going to trust the system until we can demonstrate that we respect them and meet them where they're at and appreciate where they're at. And I think because of us all sitting on the same level, sitting in a circle, going to meetings together, texting one another, talking to one another, it demonstrates to the parents that we respect each other and we work together, and that might maximize their engagement. But I think it's also critical that during court hearings, there is not one person who has a louder voice. Every party is treated as an equal participant in this process. Judge Tarnowski, as noted, asks everyone questions, and everyone is held accountable. I am certain that when social workers are asked, what exactly did you do to demonstrate active efforts? It's probably not the most comfortable seat to be sitting in, but it's their job to answer that question and to answer it in a way that everyone can understand and appreciate. It does seem to me doing CHIPS in both ICWA and non-ICWA court, I never feel as though the county's recommendations are rubber stamped. I always feel like the recommendations are looked at and the responses are carefully analyzed before a decision is made. I think if you're going to implement an ICWA court, the court has to be willing to make a finding that active efforts were not demonstrated. And if the court is not willing to take that risk, I don't think you truly have a collaborative approach to ICWA. We also focus very hard on not making ICWA compliance be a checklist. We look at it more as working with families and not making sure every item is checked off. Now, having said that, we work hard on compliance as well, but that's not what drives the court. Thank you.
Thanks, Terri. So we do have a question. Does land acknowledgement ever come up in this setting?
It really has not.
Okay.
I can just jump in though and say that I think it comes up maybe in the different components, but maybe not just in this setting, but like in the Guardian Ad Litem program, it has come up. And we are in the process of developing a very intense 4-day training for ICWA Guardians Ad Litem. And it has come up in our ICWA policy manual and as part of that training. So, I mean, and the guardians are part of this ICWA court, so.
Thanks. Any further questions from our audience participants? Any questions you want to ask for our panel on collaborative measures and building them into practice when it comes to parental engagement in ICWA? We also had a follow-up question. Is it possible to look at that training policy? I think that would be directed at you, Erika.
Yes, our policy manual is on the so very close to being finally completed. And once that is, it absolutely is going to be available.
Okay.
I can forward that on to Lynelle. I'm sure it'll come up at one of our upcoming meetings as well.
Yes, and there's contact information you'll see at the end of this, and that'll be included in there. You can feel free to reach out. Okay, so any final thoughts from our panelists on incorporating collaborative measures into practice? Any recommendations for other courts or practitioners about how to build those collaborative efforts?
So Lynelle, I do have one thought. I know early on Judge Tarnowski said she thought I might address the issue of how the notices to the tribe have been addressed in St. Louis County. And I think historically, we would probably all admit that those notices did not include a lot of the information that was required for a tribe to make a really informed decision about whether or not a child had an association with that tribe. And we have all worked very hard at making sure that good information is provided. I think it's really clear to me that that form, which is part of ICWA compliance, part of the Minnesota Indian Family Act, is critical. But that's the form that tells us whether or not we are working with an Indian child. And historically, things like fathers' names, people's places of birth, grandparents' names simply were not included. And just a quick story, I have a case where it is not considered an ICWA case at this point in time, but when the notice was filled out, the adoptive family's name for my client, the mother in the case, were listed as the relatives. Not the actual biological relatives that would have made the connection to a tribe. And the conversation about adding the biological relatives to that form really was fascinating to me and really demonstrated that unless we all keep raising the question of who are the parents, who are the grandparents, what's the possible connection to any tribe, we're not going to get good information. And so sometimes I'm a little bit of a pain in the drain because I keep raising this issue over and over again. But to me, that's the form that establishes the tie to a tribe. And so that issue gets raised informally with the county attorney. And if things don't happen, it gets brought to court and the judge takes action on it. But as you look at collaborative measures, that's one of the things I think you really have to include. And parents have to participate in that. They may not be at a point when their children have been taken away to help you sit down and do a family tree. But that is something that the parent attorneys in St. Louis County oftentimes provide to the social worker, because the parent is more willing to have that conversation with us than with the person that just removed their children.
Thanks, Terri. So we've come to the end of our questions. We have an opportunity for final thoughts or input from our panelists or from our participants. Any final questions that you want to pose? And in the meantime, waiting for those questions to come in, if for our panelists, if you had a final takeaway, if you had a final thought to offer to our audience on building collaborative efforts and relationships into ICWA practice on parental engagement, what would you like to say? Anyone? I'll pick up.
I will say this. I think the availability of all of us to the parents contributes to the success of this court. And for me as an attorney and as a parent, it is so incredibly rewarding to have folks call me or text me a year or 2 years and 3 years after their case has closed, just to give me an update on how things are going. And to me, those phone calls, those text messages are proof that we worked collaboratively with that family, that they would still be willing to reach out and have a conversation with us. That, however, requires that we're all available. And sometimes attorneys are tough to reach, but one thing that we do for the parent attorneys in Duluth is we are all available by cell phone, by text message to our clients. And I know that's not true across the country, but that is a significant part of our work with our clients.
Thank you, Terri.
I would just say that, I think our court is really modeling behaviors. I think that, as a parent, we know that we're not going to do it alone. We know that we need help from time to time, maybe more time than other times. We know that we need to advocate for our kids. And we know that we need to encourage our kids, even when bad things happen to them or difficult situations arise. And I think that the court really models that parenting. We try to encourage people. We try to, pat them on the back and let them know when something great has happened, when they graduate treatment, when they get their kids back on a trial home visit. When things get tough, we refer them to the folks that they need to reach out to for help. We problem solve with them. One day in court, I asked a mother if there was anything she needed, and she said, well, I really need a car seat. And so I turned to the social worker and say, well, can you get her a car seat? And the social worker says, well, I probably could get it to her in about 3 days. And I said, well, she needs to go to the grocery store before that. Oh, right. So I'll get it to her this afternoon. So, this parent asked for help, and we can work together as a team to figure that out and get her needs met. And I think that again, it creates a model for her to see how we as the team that's there, the safety net, the supporters, the people that want her to get her kids back can help her if she just is willing to ask for help and accept the help. That's a tough thing for a lot of people to do. Acknowledge that they need some help. And so by encouraging them and letting them know that when they do ask for help, they're going to get help. I think that's a big key to parental engagement as well.
Well, it doesn't look like we are getting any questions in from our participants. So you've been given a couple of links in the chat to some additional resources that NCJFCJ has regarding ICWA, and providing the contact information for our panelists today, as well as myself. I just want to say thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today and for providing us with some wonderful information about your practice and helping others to consider how they can move beyond the minimum requirements of ICWA in order to move into best practices for improving outcomes for children and families. Thanks to you all, and thanks to Mark as well. We appreciate your input, and we hope to see you soon.